the area and meet with some of the local farmers. And the impression I got was it was fantastic fertile ground, but the farmers are still in a state of so many challenges and needs on the ground that I think in hindsight, maybe, you know, in a meeting with them, it is good to hear what their challenges are, but their challenges are still very on the ground kind of level challenges, you know, like water and security and access to markets. So we've got that picture, but I think in terms of the long-term offering, and once I had the meeting with you guys the other night, I realized that, you know, what you want to offer is supposed to duplicate in any other area around the world. So I think we need to really take the understanding of the community needs of those farmers and see how best we can come with a model that can be duplicated and work for the circumstances in Africa, or whether it is in South Africa, Nigeria, or wherever, so that is a blueprint that we can all be proud of, and it can be duplicated elsewhere.
Thank you.
I would like to add to that yes, that's the ultimate goal, but let's not make our lives complicated with that at this point. So I think we would overstretching potentially if we wanted to achieve that right now. So the set point for us now is much more humble, so let's turn around. Let's begin with the set point, because then we have that in mind already, and that is the MVP, meaning that's a term coming from the startup scene, meaning minimum viable product, which means that we do the least things we have to do in order to show that our underlying concept actually works. And so in our case, the MVP is that we bring 2 or 3 solutions from the African continent. Solutions can be startups or can be other offerings that are in the market in Africa. We bring them together into this community and we make them work together by software or by other means. That is the MVP. And what they should be doing is that they should together solve one of the problems that this community has. This is our MVP. So to turn it around, what we need to understand is what is one of those problems that are worth tackling this way that the community right now has. So if you can look at it from that perspective, as you talk about what you experienced last week, I think that gives us a good polarity for the ideation in between. Does it make sense?
So to add what Thomas, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I'd like to add so that we really need to think about what is the focus of our action. Yeah, so we cannot solve all the problems at once. Yeah, so that's not possible. But we need to identify in the context of Motherland something we can do with what Thomas just described for the community and work on the implementation of kind of an infrastructure that could be digital, so that could be an app, or that could be some other kind of software or hardware solution that helps the community to overcome some critical hurdles, yeah, that currently keep them off from a positive development. And we need to be able to measure this, yeah, and really see that we are making a difference. Because what the minimum viable product, or MVP, is really all about, knowing what hypotheses we need to test, yeah, with this first prototype, and what we need to measure to understand if we are right or wrong, or what we need to learn along the way. Yeah. And so therefore, this is not the fully fledged Motherland program as we envision it. Yeah. Because that is, we are still resource constrained, and we need to bring us into the situation where we can gather enough resources really to make it big and long lasting. Yeah. And as we are like a startup, and this is a different approach than probably most of the development aid organizations, yeah, we are humble. We try to understand where to tackle the challenges of the people, where is also a pull by the community to solve that. So we are not pushing anything and forcing anything. So we are going to solve that because we think that is right. Yeah, we need to understand where we bring our perspective, our approach of Motherland, and the challenges in a wise way together. Yeah, and I also would say, if it's something that is not scalable after that right away, yeah, so we can live with it as long as other critical hypotheses that this approach is really helping the community, yeah, is proven. So, but as we know from most of the other communities we have talked to, that there are overlaps, definitely, yeah. And so that's why I'm quite confident that we figure something out that has at least the potential to scale, and that we're able to bring it to other communities after the MVP. Any remarks, questions, other ideas, thoughts?
Yeah. First of all, I think that conversation we are having right now and talking about MVP, etc., should have taken place before we saw the farmers. I looked at least speaking for myself, at the situation, if you like, from a very holistic point of view. And I also operated from the following kind of premises. I see agriculture as a relative complex kind of industry. And in order to even understand where, even if you choose only one or two potential solutions, we need to understand quite a bit of what makes agriculture tick.
That's correct.
Cool.
Absolutely.
That's
totally correct. Yeah.
And I actually, when I was sitting there last night to prepare a little bit for our conversation today, and as I said, my whole approach was a lot wider than what we're now trying to limit it to. I compared our approach to wanting to become a conductor, because ultimately that's what, I mean, you call yourself an orchestra, or we call ourselves an orchestrator. That's what we want to eventually create. Now, a conductor needs to know his orchestra. He needs to know music. He needs to know what every individual instrument in an orchestra means, what the importance of the first violin is, etc., etc., etc. And I thought through a couple of more conversations that we kind of, and input from people like Wayne and others who are directly involved in farming, would give us an overall picture where we then kind of drill down on maybe one or two areas. But I believe that there must be a fundamental kind of knowledge available in order to see that we are able to do that. And I also see a prototype in a very different light to a project where we may have to be more involved in the prototype in order to develop those skills also within our own team, in order then to be the conductor and direct the farmers and the startups, etc. Right now, we don't even know what startups we should approach. What skill spaces do they really need to have in order to solve the problems? Because
that's why we're sitting together.
Do we understand the problems ourselves well enough?
So that's exactly so. So Musa, I see your hand. Let me quickly respond to Haman, because I think that's important. So the I can follow your image totally, and but just like a conductor doesn't start by practicing on a whole orchestra, right? We cannot start practicing on a whole orchestra either. So what is the first step? Something very small that the conductor does as a first. Probably he or she will borrow a violin from a friend to start making some first music. Or he or she will learn how to read sheet music or something like that. That's what we're after. And that does not exclude seeing the big picture. So somebody who picks up a violin does not necessarily become a conductor unless he or she wants to, right? And that changes the perspective. And this is what we're after. We will be this orchestrated, as you point out, but right now we're not. Right now we have to be extremely humble because we know shit, and we have to get just a little bit into that into that journey. And this is why we have this conversation today, with all of the knowledge we have here, the knowledge from the community now, and of course the knowledge from the ground represented by Waynand, and our knowledge of how do you put together startups into a working solution. And this is exactly what we're after. Musa, do you want to suggest, or Sebastian, do you want to say something first?
So Musa can go first. Mm-hmm. I'm patient.
Yeah, hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello?
Hello.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I just have some 1-2 questions to ask. First of all, I want to know, like, I think Thomas and Alma have been talking about MVP. I want to know the meaning of that in the first place. And secondly, I also want to know how can we, especially those who are outside of the country like South Africa, where these activities are taking place, how can we participate in those activities? What will be our role to play? Because we also want to learn. We want to learn some of the skills that how these things are done in those communities where these activities will be taking place more. Unfortunately, we are far off. Like for me, I'm here in Sierra Leone, so except we meet through online. So how can I be part of it, or how can other people also be part of it and we benefit and also work together? Then I also want to know whether if the MVP activities is different from that of the activities of the motherland activities, or if it is just the same programs that is just working together. But I just want to know whether it is, if these are two different activities, and how can we get involved in it. So that's just what I want to cross check. So thank you.
Thank you for your question. So first of all, I tried to explain MVP. Yeah, the MVP stands for minimum viable product, and this is a term coming from the startup world, and it's or from research. Yeah, and it says nothing else than we need to figure out what hypotheses are critical for our idea or our startup, or in this case, for the approach of Motherland. Yeah, and we need to figure out how to test those hypotheses. Yeah, because we don't know if all of what we think is true or how it works exactly. Yeah, and building on the orchestra. Yeah, so probably you are not, as a conductor or componist of some piece of music, you're not starting with a symphonic orchestra. Yeah, because this is super highly complex with probably 100 musicians playing all together. Yeah, and maybe we start with a quartet of 4 instruments. Yeah, and test out if the ideas behind the music we have are working well. Yeah, and we can bring it to the audience, and the audience like it. Yeah, so and then we can go ahead and making it more complex and make it longer, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, which we obviously strive for. Yeah, so we are not here to do just a little experiment. So don't get me wrong, that's a prototype. Yeah, but it's a prototype that is focused on delivering results that are proving that we are right. And if we are not right, that we are able to learn what is not correct within our assumptions. Yeah. So, and that is really important, because otherwise it might be that we are building something too complex. Yeah. And we cannot understand when something is not working, or it takes too long to build it. Yeah. Or it costs, in our case, too much. Yeah. And we would take too long for fundraising. Yeah. To build something fully fledged. Yeah. And then we could start maybe in 12 months time. Yeah. And not earlier. So that's why it's important to think about, okay, what is the smallest thing, so to say, we can build, yeah, as a prototype that is creating value for the target group, which is the community and the farmers and the people living in the community, because we want to achieve something really decent for them. And but it will be bigger, for example, working with more startups, with more solutions, more complex later on. That's why we try to figure out where is the chance, and this is what today is all about from my perspective, learning from the interviews from last week, yeah, where we can make a difference with our approach, meaning bringing infrastructure solutions from startups or any other entity that is really able to create value in that context into the community. And as Hermann said, working together with the community and with the startups to implement their solutions for the favor of the development of the community. And we need to do that hands-on, because otherwise we are not learning, we are not validating if we are not doing it hands-on. This is our responsibility. Therefore, we need to go into fundraising to fund some team members on the ground that are doing this, yeah, making it possible that Thomas and myself are able to come to South Africa and stay a couple of weeks or a month, yeah, to really work with you on the ground to make it fly. Yeah, and this is what the MVP is. Yeah, and to answer your question, Musa, how you can help. So it's really important that you bring in your perspective out of another cultural, societal, or from your habitat's point of view that is different than the community in South Africa. And we are going to continue the conversation about the learnings of the MVP, yeah, sharing it with you, listening to your opinions, your thoughts, your ideas, yeah, because it's important for the scalability that we get your perspective, yeah. And you, on the other hand, will learn what we do on the MVP, what is working, what's not working, how we improve, yeah, and how we make it work. So this is what you get out of that. If you are there like you are, Musa, which we really highly value, yeah, on most of the conversations, and we will share it with you in the community. Yeah. And so, and therefore, the next step is really about learning, or call it validating, and proving that the community is saying after the MVP, hey, Motherland made a difference. Yeah. And this is our objective. And if we are not achieving that, we failed. It's as easy as that. And nobody here wants to fail. Herman, you want to say something?
I'm still thinking. Look, I appreciate that no conductor will choose Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as his first appearance before a public. But in order for him or her to choose his or her MVP, they need to have an overall picture. And that's on top of it, we talk about learning. Now, it's not only our learning, there are at least 4 or 5 parties involved, namely we ourselves, the farmers, the startups, etc. So for me, going back to the orchestra, the idea would be to develop an overall concept out of which we say, what is the most viable? And with a minimal effort where we can achieve those goals we ultimately want to achieve.
100% agree, Herman. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, so this is why we want to do sense making, understand as much as possible of the complex environment of the community. We are not going to understand it 100%, yeah, because that might take forever and develop further while we understand. But we need to understand it well enough that we can make a decision where to focus on, and then making an impact to the community on the big picture. Yeah, and the big picture is really key. If we don't understand the big picture, and maybe I was not clear enough on that, then we cannot do anything. That doesn't mean that we affect the whole picture, because that's complex. Yeah, and it's not only complicated, it's complex. That's even worse. Yeah, and we need to deal with that. Yeah, and really making progress, not only for us, but for the community. And this is really a high set goal, I would say so.
I think if I can sort of come in here, I'm going to put it on the table, and if I'm completely wrong, then shoot me down. But I think I'm confused. So I'm going to ask these questions based on the fact that I'm confused, because if I'm confused, I know Lorica will be confused. Doesn't take much, Lorica. So I will then assume that there's a few of the other team members that also needs a bit more clarity. The reason for this call today is sense making. We're trying to make sense of what? We're trying to make sense of the overall picture. And I think that also goes back to Herman's earlier statement of we should have done this before we met with the farmers. Are we trying to make sense of the entire project? Or are we trying to make sense of the identified prototype that we now need to take to the next step? Because I'm confused about that. I think we've already made sense of a lot of what needs to be done and rolling it out to the rest of Africa. And I don't think that's where we want to be right now. We need to be looking at what are we going to do for Chavasa Agri Dam now. We've made a commitment to them that they are our #1 prototype. If we don't act very quickly, I've been in the environment, if we don't act very quickly, they're going to turn around and say, it's just another impact fund, nothing's going to happen here.
But that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point that we're making.
then we are just talking, I don't know, on two different planets right now. We are not talking about the general context idea of motherland. We are only talking about the sense making of the community, understanding what their needs are and their challenges
But
are.
explain that point to me, because maybe I'm missing it. I don't understand. What is the point that you're making? I don't understand it. I don't understand if you say you're just focusing on this community. I need clarity on what we are saying about this community.
Well, this community is Chivahase.
Yeah.
So first of all, secondly, we're not going to solve their entire needs in that first step. So we're saying is we want to find out the most important pressing one issue that we can solve. That's exactly what it creates the strongest need. We're not going to and we must not, and we will not, and we cannot come in and turn everything around, right? But what we need to do is to make their lives easier with an existing solution that already is out there that they are not aware of, or technically just not capable of adapting to their needs.
I think I get it. I think I get it. The process of because we can't solve everything, and the community has to own. They need to own the problem that they have, the challenges that they have, and to work together to solve it as much as they can. Them getting together to identify the most important thing is part of the process, because they are getting engaged, and then we would work with them on that. I think, am I getting it right? I could be getting it wrong.
Careful. Chivasi is not a community. Chivasi is an agricultural enterprise. That the way I have looked at it, and I think I'm in agreement there, but possibly, I hope, with Wayne, as an anchor for the community.
Yes.
That is why I mentioned that hub idea the last time. Chivasi is not a community. Chivasi is an agricultural enterprise, full stop. And they're quite happy. They make their profits. They sell reasonably well. All he wants to see, and that's why he offered his facilities, is to see that the community benefits from whatever ideas we have. So be careful. So Chivasi is, as I said, just to finally repeat once more, not the community. It's part, the hub, the core, the basis, call it what you like, of the community. It's the enabler for the community to work.
All right, then in my mind, Chivasi is that enterprise plus everybody around them. Let's give them a name. What is the name for them? That entire group of people, 50 smallholder farmers and 500 people, and Chivasi in the middle. What is the name for that we want to use at this group?
Let's call the Wembe, because they are in the Wembe district, the Wembe Agri Forum, Agri Hub, whatever, Wembe.
Wembe.
VHEMBE.
Okay, Wembe. Right. So now we have a name. So we're looking at Wembe. What is their most pressing problem?
I would say, if I may, it is market information, access to markets, information regarding the competitive edge of markets, because they still remain as subsistence farmers instead of growing into real small urban farmers that makes money and profit and can go into a next level of farming.
Yeah, and that I want to just add to that. My next question, if we're talking Wembe and we're talking Chivasi Agri-Dam, and we're talking the Wembe farmers that we met with that have a lack of market information, market access and everything, if that becomes our focus, how is that going to benefit Chavase Agri Dam? And that's why I'm trying to get clarity on what we are talking about, because our prototype and what we spoke to the chief about and what we spoke to Nomvuyo about in every meeting has been to give them as the prototype the benefit. But if we're just working on market access and how do we better the market access for the Vembe farmers, that has no benefit other than, and it actually has no benefit. It's actually going to detract from Chavase Agri Dam if we're going to involve Nomvuyo to now spend her time as an employee of Chavase Agri Dam to work with that farming community. And that's why I'm trying to get my head around it, because I've worked with these people. It's going to cause confusion and friction if we are now working with the community and not with Chavase Agri Dam as the prototype.
Makes total sense. Herman, just one comment on what Wenyan just said. So market access is probably as a first step the wrong thing to do. What is the next most pressing problem that is also in line with the goals of Chavase? Herman.
I don't see that necessarily as a long step to do, and I'll tell you why. I'm different slightly from Wenyan here. If Chavase would open up a channel, distribution costs could be carried by a wider range of products. Just one simple example. So I think to be really clear and make it interesting to them, we would have to identify the benefits. But even through marketing, I think there are benefits for Chavase. Even a slight, should I say, value add could be a benefit both for the community of farmers as well as for Chavase. But these things are to be identified exactly how. That goes back to my even.
Oh, sorry.
Pardon?
Oh, sorry. I know somebody came into the room.
Okay. So, Wenyan, I don't want to contradict you, but I see even through the marketing side benefits for Chavase, but we would have to, as I said, be very clear and identify them. And of course, talk to them, because we don't know what their aspirations are in that context.
And that takes me to my actual point. We need to have this conversation with Chavase Agri Dam as a starting point before we can then move on to the community. Because if we go to the farmers like we did last week, we sit under the tree, we didn't make any promises, but if we come with any promises or anything that they could perceive as a promise and we don't deliver, we have lost their trust. We need to first know what Chavase Agri Dam is going to be able to bring to the table, or what we're going to be able to achieve there, and how that then involves the community. We're approaching it the wrong way around if we're going to the farmers first, because then we're going to be dictating to the prototype.
Thomas, you may remember before I went, I actually said there might be a second and even a third conversation necessary. And that, I think, has just been highlighted by Wenyan as well. I mean, all I did with regards to the chief, I phoned him earlier this week. I thanked him again for the permission to visit and use Vuyo's time, and said, look, I'm not going into any detail. We are now kind of digesting what we've learned, and we will come back to you, and then you will be included in our conversations. Because ultimately, he is a man who has the decision-making power for his own operation, and he is a force to be reckoned with within the farming community. So from that point of view, I think our sense-making makes a lot of sense today, because we're clarifying questions, or we're raising questions which need additional clarification.
When do we need to be speaking with people? about all of this?
Well, as soon as possible.
I think first we have to speak among us, because it's very apparent that there's some unclarity that needs resolved first. We have a raised hand also since a while, and once we have resolved once we have created clarity among us, then we can speak with others.
The person who raised the hand is Tumi.
Tumi. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Tumi.
You're muted, Tumi.
Muted.
All right. How's it, everybody? It's good to see everybody today. Thanks. I could join you guys today. And like Hilly actually are talking about one of the district we kind of worked on a couple of years back, the Bembe district. A very highly agricultural productive district. And we were able to build some networks around the area with the agricultural extension, and some of the relationships then are still there even till today, you know, where you have a variety of farmers who are growing on a small scale and others who are growing on a very large. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Now it seems to be good. Can you repeat the last couple of sentences?
All right. I'm saying that we, in that district, that you would find a very widespread variety of farmers, from the smallholders to the very large farmers. But then what they were also trying, what they were struggling with was the market most of the time. It was that now we can produce, but then the distance between our market, mostly with this Johannesburg or the city of Joburg City Deep, the distance to take, or the cost for the transporting those tonnages to this site takes all the money that we put in within our farming activities. And also the distance between them getting inputs into their farms was quite a bit of a distance. So we were unable to work with that within that area for that time being, but I see that the challenges are still more or less the same. So I think we should think the Department of Agriculture around that area actually have good extension officers who work with the people on the ground. If you can build a good relationship with those guys, I think they can give you a whole lot of background and a lot of information about the farming area and how those people have been able to move some of their things in the past and where they struggled a little bit. And then maybe you can break that and find a way to take the community forward, working together with them. No, so that's me.
Are there any thoughts, additional thoughts?
Well, a brief comment to what Tumi said. We've discussed that in detail, and I think for the time being, whatever we do, we should do that between the community, Chivase, and ourselves, and leave all the bureaucrats out of the picture. I'm sure Vuyo, who has joined us now, can add to that. But as I said, we had extensive conversations around that. And believe you me, there's a strong mistrust to particular sections of the agricultural department. So I think we need to show success in order to twist those guys' arms. So they come into play at a much later stage.
All right.
Thomas, Sebastian, what about the questions you believe we need to further clarify?
So as we having the discussion right now, I believe that we need to understand the roles of community, so to say, the smallholder farmers and other members of the community, and Chivahazi, yeah, and how the interplay between during the prototype should look like, and who is has what type of interest to gain. But because we as Motherland, we have always talked about the community, yeah, to develop the self-sufficiency and self-reliance of the community. And we know we need partners like Chivahazi to really support this type of development, yeah, whether it's, we call it a hub farm or a hub partner within the community. Yeah, and as I understand now out of the conversation, I think we need to somehow sketch out, yeah, how this interplay in interaction between those two look like, yeah, so that both parties will gain out of the prototype. Yeah, but we shouldn't leave out of sight, yeah, how we are going to impact the life and the development of the community. Yeah, and yes, Chivahazi should also profit from that. Yeah, and whether it's direct or maybe indirect, because if the self-sufficiency and self-reliance of the community is enhancing, probably Chivahazi will also profit from that. Yeah, and so this interplay is not clear to me right now. Yeah, but it would be the hope that the sense making leads to a better understanding, especially for Thomas and myself, whom are not in South Africa and are not close to the circumstances and the community in Chivahazi. Yeah, and bringing our perspective in here, that we're coming to a joint conclusion how the prototype and the focus of the prototype should look like.
I think there's one thing we need to correct. You have a different perception of what you call a community. We haven't traveled in an area and there's an assembly of a couple of people. What we actually need to do, we need to build specific communities. So we're not going into a village like in Germany and you speak to the community there. We're speaking to an interest group who could come from various areas. So what we actually do with the help of Chivahazi as an anchor would be building communities. I think that is something that must be absolutely understood. We're not talking to something that is structured and exists. TUMI, for example, is involved with people, but even there, you would have to define that concept of community and start building and say who's being included in that community. And it's not necessarily the affiliation to a municipality, but rather the common interest of overcoming challenges as farmers.
Okay, Claire, I see your raised hand. I just want to respond to that quick. When we talk about community, even if you go into a village somewhere in the world, people will not be connected. Their shared interest is just that they are sitting in the same geographic location. So yes, all the warm, fuzzy humanness that goes into the community is probably missing at the moment there. And that's not a problem. That is something that evolves as people start working together. The underlying premise is that working together in a geographical bounded location is the best insurance against the fuck up of the planet, and also the best way to build wealth locally and to move towards thriving. Okay, so we understand that this is not a warm, fuzzy group of people that has grown as a village over the last centuries, but a bunch of people sitting on the same land and doing the same thing. But that does not mean that they're not cannot be regarded as a community by us, and we can help facilitate getting more interaction. But that does not mean that we have to build that's individual connection first. I think we first have to identify something that they share, all of them or most of them, as a challenge that is in line for everybody, and that we can actually solve with pre-existing solutions, and come in there, not come in there, offer these solutions to these people, to Wembe. Claire.
I can really see, because this is my second meeting, I can really see that there is a possibility of bringing the two thinkings together. The one hand, the community and its needs. On the other hand, Shivasa and what it has to offer with the influences of the socioeconomic environment, as well as the chief and Wiyu and her role. It is not mutually exclusive. I can see it can be a very inclusive project as long as we understand what the outcomes needs to be. So I agree with Herman, maybe we need to talk more and explain more, but the emphasis should be on Shivasa is going to be the enterprise, and the beneficiaries can be the Wembe farming community and taking cognizance of their needs, but ultimately it's a Wembe project.
Claire has raised her hand. Claire, do you want to say something? Claire, do you hear us?
I have a common point with Wienand. I'm confused. And especially because when you speak of prototype, prototype is based on a lot of data. Have you done your literature research? Have you done are you based on case study, or are you, on what are you based? Now, for the moment, I understand only one community, whatever you want to call it, is targeted. But on one, you cannot do a prototype or anything. And first, and second, there has been a lot of research done in South Africa on the need and problems of the very small farmers and so on. Is that already part of your research?
So I think you're here for the first time, right, Claire? Or you haven't been often in the motherland? Okay. So okay, this is going to take a little bit longer. I'm going to start with the meta, because that's important for this discussion, and then I'm going to talk about what we've done for the last 1.5 years, and why we arrive at this point. And maybe that also clarifies some aspects of this entire conversation. So thank you for triggering that, Claire. To frame this for everybody. So what is the meta of all of this? The meta is that we collectively as a species have fucked up the planet. And we've done that by applying a very reductionist, narrow band of understanding and looking at the world. And out of that come certain properties that lock us as societies all around the globe into a certain mode of behavior that extracts value from humans and value from the planet, thereby killing both, essentially. The two main aspects of these are that one, we have based our entire economies on a financial system that is based on itself. So we're basing our currencies in themselves. This is why we are forced to produce more GDP. And this is forcing us, the only way to produce more GDP after a certain amount of time and saturation of products and services in the markets. And the only way to increase GDP is by more extraction. That's what we're seeing. That's the problem. Now we have on the other side the representation of the people who could try and hold up against that. Let's say we call that the governments, and let's look at those governments that are somehow democratic. They are trapped in a short-term marketing cycle. A short-term marketing cycle, usually 4 or 5 years, that is a race to the bottom of anything, truth and depth first. So you cannot really tackle that underlying main generator function that leads to the demise of the planet and the people by current modes of politics. No fucking way. So what do we do? Out of that emerge several points. The main point being that humans, from several perspectives, evolutionary biology, from a purely economic perspective, from a nature perspective, etc., are better off in smaller groups, 1,000 to 4,000 people. And we can talk forever about why these numbers, but 1,000 to 4,000 people in a bioregion caring for each other, while connected globally through means of transport, and more importantly, a virtual layer of communication like we're using right now. So if we move fast enough, we can have that kind of world. If we don't move fast enough, we will be forced to live in these types of communities because no other way of living will be possible. As the supply chains, the global supply chains break down because of, just to name one, the jet stream at one point will break down. What happens to global airfares? They will break down. So that is the meta. That is where we're coming from. So what we've done is we have looked at what are ways to leverage current technological solutions, and we focus on technological solutions because they are scalable, right? It's important to be able to scale up any solution as quickly as possible. So what are technical solutions that can help existing communities become more self-sufficient and self-reliant? That's the underlying thesis from the get-go. Okay. So through a series of deep dives, conversations over the course of at least 3 months, we identified the post-harvest value chain as the strongest leverage point for this kind of change. We then accumulated a database of initially more than 600 startups across the continent that are working in that field. And we ran a project with well, the oldest business school in the world to qualify them. We ended up with a database of about 320 qualified startups. Now, the third step was identifying a community as a starting point for this journey. So we now have identified Wembe, led by Chihavasi. And now the step is that we're here in right now to take the first step into this journey. And that has to be super concrete. That has to be one thing that really changes something for the people, but that is also doable for us. That is what we're looking for.
The fact that you started off with post-harvest is exactly where my first point was. Post-harvest, a lot of the farmers are getting stuck in the post-harvest arena, not getting value for their products. Whether we work it through whatever channels, I think the concrete one binding factor is the post-harvest challenges.
I didn't really understand the meaning of that. Can you go into that a little bit deeper, please?
I see Herman wants to join in. Herman, I think you follow what I'm saying, because you were in the conversation where Susan said she fetches 100 or 200 rand for a crate of macadamia, and Wynand, who knows the post-harvest price for macadamia nuts is 4,000 rand a crate. That is the kind of challenges that the community sit, because they do not know what the value of their produce post-harvest is.
Not only that, I mean, that is a very valid point, Lorica, and we actually, I think, nearly had that poor lady when we told her what potentially she should get. So you're absolutely right, but there's a lot more in the post-harvest value chain that are challenges. I had a session earlier with Kenilwe, who wants to kind of engage in that domain, and we were looking at the food wastage, and the food wastage in South Africa is estimated to be about 1/3 of the total food earned, and 50% of which take place in the agricultural post-harvest value chain, not even transport, already on the farm. Out of that 1/3 of food lost, 50% are occurring on farms. Now, that may not be applying to the same extent to people who grow their stuff on trees. I'm not sure. Wynand, I'm sure, could comment on that. But it definitely applies to, for example, cash crop farmers. So there is a lot of work to be done. And again, if for the sake of argument, our choice would be to help these farmers, the farming community, to reduce that 50% to 20%. And if that is done with the help of Chivazi Akredam then could say, okay, we've reduced it, there is a little fee for our involvement. So going back to the benefits, etc. But these things would have to be discussed and identified and put also actual figures to the whole thing. Also, and I'm going to share that with the rest of the group. I did share with some a thing that I call the prototype, the whys, the hows, and the what. And for me, the first step that I suggested in the how was simply creating an infrastructure based on trust and understanding that benefits and leads to a close cooperation between all parties involved. And that you can't have after one meeting. That's not possible.
Exactly, that takes time. But that's also means that we need time. Do we have time?
Well,
Why not? Why not says no?
Look, the trust building exercise can be combined with actual work. It's not just conversation. If we, in agreement with the community and Chivazi Academ, identify a specific area and start working on, that's part of a trust creating exercise.
I have no issue with it could take 12 months, could take 24 months, as long as there's a plan and as long as there's a clear plan on where we're going. Vuyo is on this call, but I mean, she, like I said earlier, she has a corporate role to fulfill as the general manager of Chavasa. And at some point, she's going to have to explain to the chief why she might be spending 3 hours in meetings a week, but nothing has come to fruition on the business side. And that's all I'm guarding against. That might not be the fact, but we need to guard against that. And that's the only reason why I say there's got to be action points and there's got to be deliverables. It can't remain as a conversation for another 6 months.
I agree. That's exactly why we want to see the first concrete problem that we can solve with existing solutions in the market.
If we can get some quick wins, that'll make a lot of difference, I think.
The easiest way to get that entire Vembe community behind you is to get a quick win. And I think
Correct.
that's what sort of
Absolutely.
caused a little bit of confusion, because when this conversation started an hour ago, there was talk of potentially developing an app. That's not a quick win for a community where there's very little connectivity.
Sorry, Wayne, that's a misunderstanding. We never said developing an app. Never, ever.
Well, there was talk of an application.
Okay, so no, that's a misunderstanding.
That's a complete misunderstanding. Maybe we raised an app as an example. Yeah, but I think we should be all aligned, because we are talking for now quite some time on Motherland, and I think we had a good understanding of it. And I personally see nothing has changed. Yeah, but what we need to understand is bring the stakeholders, and this is Chivahase and the Wembe community together and think about how Motherland is making a difference with what we do on the ground for the community to really get this low-hanging fruit off the tree. Yeah, and build trust, create an impact, and validate our hypotheses that Motherland is actually working and we can scale it. And Chivahase is standing behind us because they say, hey, this is creating value, but also all members of the communities we are working with. Yeah, and we always said that it's not about a single venture we are supporting, like Chivahase. This is not the sole purpose of Motherland, supporting one single company. It's about the people, and the company Chivahase is part of the surrounding people. Yeah, and we need to see that as a whole and think about, okay, how can we support the development of, I call it community, and I see Chivahase as part of that as a whole. And this is what we want to figure out, so that we can go with some kind of plan that is decent and sound to the community and to Chivahase to say, this is what we are going to do. What do you think about that? Give us feedback. Maybe we have concrete questions. And now I hand over to Hermann.
First of all, I think I need to stress there are not only two stakeholders, because we always refer to Chivahase and the community as a stakeholder. Motherland is just as much a stakeholder. Okay, so I think we need to be absolutely clear about that. At least that's the way I see the whole situation. If I'm wrong, you must correct me. And if Sebastian, if you did speak, you were actually muted. If that is correct, then I'm going to repeat my proposal. How can we create a hub where these three parties are working together, even if it's a relatively small identified area, but working together in order to achieve the objective, namely improving the livelihood of a community?
So?
What do you mean so?
What does that mean in concrete terms? That's what we're trying to figure out in this call.
Well, look,
Vuyo raised her hand. Vuyo, what would you like to add?
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I'll just go back a little bit. In Bembe, there are 3 community pack houses that were built by the department, but because it was a group of people, it didn't work because of mistrust and all that. The buildings, they are there, so it means millions were wasted. So when I started at Chivase last year, I saw Chivase as a good farm that can lead such a project. Then there's processors like green farms, the ones in Nelspruit, I forgot the names. They are owned by a certain group of people, but then the farmers, I believe they also have certain shares in the company. So maybe something like that. I don't know, Raynan, maybe you have more information than me how it works. But if not, there's a farmer that I know that I can ask how it works. So maybe something like that.
Yeah, I've got quite a bit of information. I don't think we need to go into that because that would only be relevant if that is a starting point for us to address one of the problems. But it is basically a shared ownership model with the community and one of the processing that Vuyo is referring to. But that is a solution for one of the problems. I think the question was more around where are we going to have a quick turnaround, a quick impact, a quick answer to one of the multiple problems that there might be or challenges that there might be. And I think for that, that's exactly what needs to be the next point, is to sit down with Vuyo and the people on the farm and identify where there are areas that need to be, that could be altered slightly to give better market access, better production, what needs to be done in the post-harvest process, their pack house that's on the farm, what needs to be done in their pack house to uplift the quality so they can get a better product. Because by getting a better product, they could get better prices. By getting better prices, they could develop more, they will employ more people in that Vembe community. That's, I think, where we're going to have the quickest impact. But that's a discussion that we need to have specifically with Vuyo and her team.
And the chief, I think, needs to then eventually to be included.
Yeah. Now, when I said Vuyo and her team, I generally include him. Yeah. And if I did misunderstand about an app, I think that's what caused a lot of my confusion in the beginning, was that is 100% yes. In the long run, that would be wonderful. I mean, I've spoken previously of the app that's been developed in Zambia to grade their cattle and how that's changed the lives of the rural farmers, because now there's an app. They don't get ripped off by the buyers anymore because they can do their own grading on the app relating to day-to-day market prices. So long-term, definitely, that's where I want to go. But that caused confusion for me because I don't see that as a short-term solution. And that's what I was referring to. We need to have a short-term solution now. What are we going to do that's going to show this community and this prototype that this is going to make an impact, and how do we replicate that then into other projects?
Yeah, and Wayne, and maybe just to add, so we are not building anything besides bringing the right things together and let them make the magic, yeah, and work hard that the magic could happen, so to say, for the community. But maybe it makes sense to bring such an app from someone who has already developed the app to the community and let it make the magic, yeah, because it's already out there. And this is what we try to do with the database, to identify those startups in Africa, like you, the one you just mentioned, that is creating value for a community. Yeah, and our purpose is to find those pieces of technology, or call it an app, that could work in a community, and we need to figure that out. Yeah, and
Sebastian, you're absolutely correct. But again, and I think when I kind of propagate a more intimate relationship, I think that is necessary specifically for the prototype, not because there is the opportunity for us to really identify what is needed when we start replicating. So the intimacy with a prototype needs to be more intimate than with any further project, because that's where we learn, where they learn, where we all of us in a learning process. And the more we learn, the easier it is to replicate. And for the sake of argument, one day the chief is traveling to Sierra Leone, have a meeting with Musa to tell him exactly what we learned and what we did.
Exactly, and that's why we need to be on the ground and embedded and working really closely to everyone. And when I say stakeholders, I mean all the stakeholders, and we are also stakeholders, and there are probably plenty more. Yeah, to work with everyone on the ground and being very humble and hands-on, really, to make it work. This is what the prototype needs to be all about. Yeah, because it's all about learning. Yeah, and achieving results that satisfy in the end everyone who is involved.
The one article I shared earlier is really valuable reading because, for example, they have created an app which allows now the growers to monitor exactly what the market value of their product is, etc., and don't get ripped off anymore like that poor lady who was present in our meeting last week. I mean, it's disgusting how people make use of lack of information. It's absolutely horrifying.
Can I make a suggestion what to do next? Loika just said in the chat that the challenges are clear. So let's write them down. Let's, between the people here in this call, create a list of challenges that Wembe faces. And to do this, if you all agree, I'm going to create a Google spreadsheet. Post the link here, and please, if you don't have access, request access. And then we add, can be one word descriptions, the challenges. And then from there, we take the next step to look at which is the most important out of these to tackle first, or maybe the most important 2 and 3 as a bundle. Does that work for everyone? As a concrete next step. So because then,
Absolutely.
as a result, we would be able to have more informed, deeper conversations with the people if there's a second round of conversations, or when there's a second round of conversations. And secondly, we can already start digging into who could potentially solve those solutions that isn't on the radar of that of Wembe.
By the way, Wembe is spelled.
Okay.
Thomas, Wembe is spelled V, not with W. V.
Oh, V.
VH.
Okay, got it. Fixed it. Okay. I'm gonna just put some headlines in there. Sebastian, you're in the first cell here. So challenge, right? Just a quick note on what actually is the challenge. Author and subjective impact. 1 to 5. Okay, so 5 is high. So what you do is that you put in your challenge, whatever. We can put in one as an example now. So Waynand has added market access. Correct, Waynand? And said it has high relevancy.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's a quick fix. I mean, if we get that right, we can get.
I think that was mine, but anyway, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we attribute that to Lorica and
I'm just joking, Thomas. Thanks.
So but that's how we do this, right? So please look at this, add this in this, add your challenges, the challenges you see in exactly this way. And then we can start working on those, distill a few, test this hypothesis with the community, with Wembe, as we start looking for potential solutions in our database. Does that work?
Fine with me.
Cool. Okay, that was intense, but it was also necessary, it seems. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful
Good.
weekend.
You as well. Thank you.
And same to you. Bye-bye,
Go
everyone.
well.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.